There are wars that explode across headlines, and there are wars that are fought in silence, so deep that the world never even realizes they happened. At the height of the Cold War, when nuclear missiles stood ready on both sides of the planet and the future of humanity balanced on a razor's edge, the United States executed a mission so daring, so precise, and so strategically brilliant that even today it feels almost impossible. This was not a battle in the skies. It was not a clash of armies. It was not a missile launch scene from space. It was something far more dangerous, because it happened where no one could see it, beneath thousands of feet of freezing ocean water, inside territory the Soviet Union believed was completely secure, in a sea they considered untouchable. And what American sailors accomplished that would quietly reshape the balance of power between the two greatest superpowers on Earth. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what you're going to discover about how this mission ultimately changed the strategic equation of the Cold War is something very few people truly understand. And when we reach that final revelation, you'll see why this operation represents one of the most extraordinary examples of American ingenuity ever executed. By the late 1960s, the Cold War was no longer just political tension. It was mathematical annihilation. The United States and the Soviet Union possessed enough nuclear warheads to destroy each other many times over. Submarines roamed the oceans carrying ballistic missiles. Intercontinental missiles stood inside reinforced silos. Strategic bombers remained on airborne alert. This was an era defined by one terrifying reality. Whoever miscalculated first could end civilization. And in a world like that, information wasn't power. Information was survival. The United States had built an intelligence network unlike anything the world had ever seen. Satellites orbit above Soviet territory, photographing missile fields and air bases. Signals intelligence stations intercepted radio communications. Human sources provided insights into political developments inside Moscow. But the Soviets were not careless. As American surveillance technology advanced, Soviet military planners adapted. They began shifting their most sensitive communications away from radio signals that could be intercepted through the air. Instead, they relied increasingly on something far more secure: undersea cables. Heavy, armored communication lines laid along the ocean floor, physically connecting remote naval bases to command centers deep inside the Soviet mainland. One of the most important of these communication arteries ran through the Sea of Okhotsk, a body of water bordered by Soviet territory and heavily defended. To Moscow, the Sea of Okhotsk was essentially an internal lake. Soviet submarines operated there. Soviet patrol ships guarded it. Soviet aircraft monitored it. No foreign military vessel was supposed to enter those waters. The Soviets believed those cables were safe. They believed that if a message traveled along the ocean floor instead of through the air, it was invisible to American intelligence. But inside secure rooms in Washington, analysts began asking a question that would change everything. What if it wasn't? What if, somehow, the United States could reach that cable? What if American engineers could design a device capable of listening, without cutting, without interrupting, without leaving evidence? The idea sounded almost absurd. To access that cable, an American submarine would have to enter one of the most sensitive military zones controlled by the Soviet Union. If detected, the consequences could be explosive. It could spark a diplomatic crisis. It could escalate military tensions. In the worst-case scenario, it could trigger confrontation at a time when nuclear arsenals were already primed. But here's what defines American strategic thinking during the Cold War. When confronted with risk, the response was not panic. It was innovation. And so a classified mission began to take shape, a mission that would demand extraordinary courage, surgical precision, and technological brilliance operating at the absolute edge of what was possible at the time. If you appreciate stories that show how intelligence and engineering, not just firepower, shape global history, take a second right now, subscribe, and leave a like. This channel is dedicated to uncovering the missions that quietly determine the outcome of the Cold War, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The submarine selected for this unprecedented operation was the USS Halibut. The USS Halibut was unlike most submarines in the American fleet. Originally built as a guided missile submarine, it had undergone extensive modifications for special projects. Engineers had transformed it into a platform capable of conducting deep-sea reconnaissance and highly sensitive underwater missions. It carried advanced sonar systems, specialized underwater cameras, equipment for saturation diving, tools designed not for combat, but for precision inside the submarine. The crew understood that they were not preparing for a typical patrol. Briefings were layered with secrecy. Information was compartmentalized. Even among the sailors themselves, details were shared strictly on a need-to-know basis. The target was the undersea cable in the Sea of Okhotsk. The objective was simple in wording, but staggering in execution. Find cable, install a listening device, leave undetected. That was it. No backup strike force waiting nearby. No dramatic extraction plan. Just a submarine operating alone inside hostile waters. As the halibut departed toward the North Pacific, tension began to build, not outwardly, but internally. Submarine life is already defined by confinement and discipline. But this mission added another layer: strategic consequence. Every crew member understood what discovery would mean. Imagine sitting inside a steel hull hundreds of feet below the surface, knowing that above you lies one of the most heavily monitored maritime zones controlled by your geopolitical rival. Imagine knowing that one mechanical failure, one unexpected sonar detection, one wrong calculation could expose your presence. And yet, instead of hesitation, there was focus. This is something that defined American military operations during the Cold War. Preparation replaced fear. Training replaced doubt. Procedure replaced chaos. As the submarine approached Soviet-controlled waters, noise discipline intensified. Machinery adjustments were made to reduce acoustic signatures. Movements inside the vessel became even more controlled. Conversations were quieter. Even routine tasks felt heavier. Because once they crossed into the Sea of Okhotsk, there would be no margin for error. And this is where the Real story begins to unfold. Stay with me, because in the next phase of this mission, we're going to enter the most dangerous part of the operation, the search itself. And what the crew encountered on the ocean floor will push this story into territory that feels almost cinematic, but it was real. And before we descend into that next chapter, if you're fascinated by the kind of discipline and quiet courage that defined American strategy during the Cold War, make sure you're subscribed and that you stay all the way to the end of this video. Because the final outcome of Operation Ivy Bells and how long it remained undetected is something that will completely reframe how you see the intelligence battle between the United States and the Soviet Union. The halibut moved forward into silence. Above them, the Soviet Navy patrolled confidently. Below them, hidden in darkness, lay a cable that carried the secrets of a superpower, and the United States was about to reach out and listen. Crossing into the Sea of Okhotsk was not marked by a dramatic announcement. There was no alarm, no flashing red lights, no speech from the captain, just coordinates on a chart, a subtle shift in posture, and a quiet understanding among the crew that they were now operating inside what the Soviet Union considered sovereign military sanctuary. From that moment forward, every second mattered. The Sea of Okhotsk was not open ocean. It was enclosed, monitored, and strategically vital. Soviet ballistic missile submarines operated from bases along the Kamchatka Peninsula. Surface patrol ships ran scheduled routes. Maritime patrol aircraft scanned the waters. Hydrophone arrays listened for unusual acoustic signatures. The Soviets believed geography was on their side. What they did not anticipate was the depth of American patience. Inside the USS Halibut, the mission entered its most delicate phase. The crew could not rush. Speed increases noise. Noise increases risk. The submarine advanced slowly, adjusting ballast with surgical precision, maintaining a depth that minimized acoustic exposure. In submarine warfare, silence is survival. But this was not even warfare. This was intrusion. And intrusion demanded perfection. The objective was to locate a specific undersea communication cable believed to run across the seabed, connecting Petropavlovsk Naval Base to mainland command infrastructure. Intelligence estimates had narrowed the probable location, but estimates are not guarantees. The ocean floor is vast. Currents shift sediment. Geological formations distort sonar readings. Equipment can misinterpret shapes. A rock formation can resemble a cable. A ridge can mask the real target. The sonar operators began long, methodical sweeps. Ping, pause, adjust course. Ping. Pause. Review data. Hours turned into days. Inside the submarine. Routine continued with mechanical discipline. Meals were served. Watches rotated. Systems were monitored. But an unspoken awareness hovered over everything. They were deep inside hostile waters. At any moment, a Soviet patrol vessel could alter course. A submarine could appear on sonar. A random inspection suite could begin. And if they were detected, plausible deniability would be nearly impossible. This is a part of the story where many operations would collapse under pressure. But this is where American preparation revealed its value. The Halibut had been modified specifically for missions like this. Its sonar systems were enhanced for bottom scanning. It carried specialized photographic equipment capable of capturing detailed images of the ocean floor. Most critically, it carried a team trained for deep-sea operations under extreme conditions. Because finding the cable was only the first step. The real challenge would be installing the listening device. If you're appreciating the level of strategic risk involved here, take a moment now to like this video and subscribe. Stories like this show that dominance isn't just about visible power. It's about calculated confidence. And trust me, the most intense part of this mission is still ahead. Stay with me until the end. As the submarine moved deeper into the search grid, the crew began noticing patterns in the sonar returns. Subtle linear anomalies, slight deviations from natural seabed formations. The commanding officer ordered a slower pass. The Halibut descended carefully, closing the distance between hull and ocean floor. Powerful lights illuminated darkness that had not been disturbed in decades. And then they saw it, a cylindrical structure, partially embedded in sediment, stretching across the seabed in a straight, deliberate line. There are moments in military operations where confirmation triggers adrenaline. This was one of them. The cable had been found, but discovery brought no celebration, only the next phase. The engineers on board prepared the tapping device, a remarkable piece of Cold War ingenuity. Officially, it did not exist. Unofficially, it was one of the most sophisticated passive listening systems ever built at the time. The device had one essential requirement. It could not interrupt communication. Cutting the cable was out of the question. Even a brief signal disruption would trigger investigation. The Soviets monitored their internal communications carefully. Any anomaly would prompt immediate response. So American engineers developed a non-invasive solution, a clamp that would attach around the exterior of the cable, capturing electromagnetic emissions without penetrating insulation. It was elegant, it was subtle, and it had to work perfectly. But installing it required something even more dangerous. Divers. Deep-sea divers would have to exit the submarine and operate on the ocean floor, in freezing water, under crushing pressure, inside enemy-controlled territory. Think about that. Men voluntarily stepping out of the relative safety of a nuclear submarine into total darkness, hundreds of feet below the surface, knowing that above them lies one of the most militarized maritime zones in the world. Training prepares you physically. It does not eliminate awareness. The dive team conducted final checks. Equipment seals inspected. Oxygen levels confirmed. Tools secured. Inside the submarine, tension tightened. This was the point of no return. If a Soviet patrol vessel passed overhead and detected unusual acoustic activity, the Halibut might be forced to withdraw, leaving the divers exposed. If equipment malfunctioned, rescue options were limited. If the cable was damaged accidentally, the mission would collapse instantly. The divers exited into black water. Underwater visibility at those depths was minimal. Their helmet lights cut narrow beams through suspended particles. The seabed stretched around them in silent stillness. They approached the cable slowly. Even up close, it was imposing, thick, armored, designed to endure decades beneath the ocean. Working carefully, they positioned the tapping device. Bolts tightened, alignment adjusted, connection points secured. Every movement deliberate. Time moved differently down there. Minutes felt extended. Above, inside the Halibut, sonar operators monitored constantly. Every distant sound analyzed. Every acoustic signature classified. And then, something unexpected appeared on sonar. A faint but distinct contact. Not directly overhead, but within range. A Soviet vessel. The room went still. The captain evaluated options quickly: remain stationary and risk passive detection, withdraw slowly and risk abandoning the divers mid-operation. This is the kind of moment that separates theoretical strategy from real leadership. The decision was made to hold position. Noise levels were minimized further. Internal movement slowed to near stillness. Even mechanical systems were adjusted to reduce acoustic output. Below, the divers continued working, unaware of the precise sonar data, but fully aware of the stakes. The Soviet contact altered course. For several tense minutes, it appeared to move closer. Inside the halibut, heart rates rose, though outwardly, discipline remained intact. Then, gradually, the contact shifted away. The patrol continued its route, never realizing what lay beneath. Only after sonar confirmed safe distance did the tension release slightly. If you're feeling the intensity of this moment, imagine experiencing it in real time. And stay with this video until the end, because what this operation ultimately achieved over the following years is something almost unbelievable. Back on the seabed, the divers completed installation. The tapping device was secured firmly around the cable. Power systems activated. Recording systems initialized. There was no dramatic signal, no flashing indicator announcing success. Just confirmation from instruments that the device was functioning as designed. The divers returned to the submarine. The halibut began its slow, silent withdrawal from the Sea of Okhotsk. No alarms were triggered. No interceptors deployed. No diplomatic protests filed. Operation Ivy Bells had crossed its most dangerous threshold and survived. But what happened next is what truly transformed this mission from bold gamble to strategic masterpiece. Because the device would not simply collect data for days or weeks. It would listen for years, and the intelligence it gathered would quietly reshape how the United States understood Soviet naval readiness, communication protocols, and command structure. We are only halfway through this story. In the next phase, we'll explore what those recordings revealed, how the operation expanded, and how it remained undiscovered for far longer than anyone thought possible. And at the end of this video, I'm going to reveal the moment when everything almost unraveled. Not because of Soviet detection, but because of something far more dangerous. So don't go anywhere. Make sure you're subscribed. Stay until the final minute, because Operation Ivy Bells is just getting started. When the USS Halibut slipped silently out of the Sea of Okhotsk, the most dangerous part of the physical mission was over. But strategically, the real operation had just begun. On the ocean floor, wrapped carefully around a Soviet military communication cable, sat a device that represented the cutting edge of American engineering. It did not cut the line. It did not interrupt transmissions. It did not leave visible marks. It simply listened. The device was powered by a long-life internal energy source designed to function for extended periods without maintenance. Inside, magnetic recording systems captured electromagnetic signals emitted by the cable whenever Soviet naval commands were transmitted. Every order, every readiness update, every internal report, preserved. But installing the device was only step one. The United States needed to retrieve the recordings periodically without alerting the Soviets, which meant returning again and again. Think about the scale of that commitment. This was not a one-time raid. It was a sustained intrusion into one of the Soviet Union's most protected maritime zones. Each return trip carried the same risks. Soviet patrol ships still guarded the region. Submarines still roamed beneath the surface. Air surveillance remained active. The Sea of Okhotsk was never relaxed territory. Yet American submarines went back, carefully, methodically, with the same disciplined silence. When they arrived at the cable, divers once again descended to the seabed, detached the recording module, replaced it with a fresh unit, and returned to the submarine. Inside secure American facilities, intelligence analysts began reviewing the material. What they discovered was extraordinary. The communications were not encrypted at the level Moscow believed necessary for undersea lines. The Soviets assumed physical security was sufficient. As a result, internal naval discussions flowed in relatively accessible formats once captured. The recordings revealed patterns. Patterns are everything in military strategy. Analysts could determine how often certain submarines deployed, They could measure how long maintenance cycles lasted. They could observe how quickly command responded to simulated alerts. They could even identify which officers were responsible for specific operational sectors. This was not abstract intelligence. This was structural insight into how the Soviet Pacific Fleet actually functioned. Imagine two chess players facing each other, except one of them can hear the other discussing strategy before each move. That is what Operation Ivy Bells created. If you're starting to understand how powerful this kind of intelligence advantage is, take a moment now to like the video and subscribe, because what this operation achieved over the next several years will completely change how you see the intelligence battle of the Cold War. And trust me, the most dramatic twist in this story is still ahead. Stay until the end. As months passed, confidence grew inside American intelligence circles. The device was working flawlessly. Retrieval missions were successful. Soviet detection systems never reacted. Years began to pass. Think about that. For years, in what they consider an internal and secure sea, the Soviet Union unknowingly transmitted sensitive naval communications directly into American analysis rooms. The advantage was quiet. There were no public announcements, no headlines declaring victory. But behind closed doors, American planners now possess something priceless. Clarity. Clarity reduces fear. Clarity reduces the chance of catastrophic miscalculation. One of the greatest dangers during the Cold War was misunderstanding. If one side misread routine activity as preparation for attack, escalation could spiral rapidly. But because of Ivy Bells, the United States often knew whether Soviet activity was routine, defensive, or genuinely escalatory. That kind of insight stabilizes a dangerous world. The operation became so successful that it expanded. New submarines were modified to continue and enhance the mission. Among them were vessels from the Sturgeon class, quieter and more advanced than earlier boats. These submarines could operate with even lower acoustic signatures, reducing detection risk further. The device itself was upgraded, improved recording capacity, enhanced durability, longer operational lifespan. Each improvement reflected a deeper truth about American Cold War strategy. Innovation did not stop after initial success. It accelerated. The divers who participated in retrieval missions became some of the most highly trained specialists in the Navy. Their work required not just technical skill, but mental composure under extraordinary pressure. Imagine descending once again into freezing darkness, knowing that above you patrol ships of a rival superpower, knowing that your mission, if discovered, could trigger international crisis, and yet performing with steady hands. This is what quiet professionalism looks like. There were no cameras down there, no medals waiting on the surface, only duty. If this kind of disciplined courage resonates with you, subscribe now and stay until the final revelation of this story. Because the way Operation Ivy Bells eventually came to light is something almost as dramatic as the mission itself. As the 1970s progressed, the intelligence community began integrating Ivy Bells data into broader strategic assessments. Patterns observed through cable taps were cross-referenced with satellite imagery and other signals intelligence. The result was a remarkably detailed picture of Soviet naval behavior. American commanders could assess readiness levels more accurately. They could determine whether fleet movements were exercises or actual deployments. They could evaluate how quickly communication chains function under simulated stress. In a nuclear standoff, reaction time matters. Understanding how fast your adversary can mobilize is critical. And thanks to Operation Ivy Bells, the United States often had that understanding. There is something important to recognize here. This was not about humiliation. It was not about theatrical dominance. It was about strategic balance. When one side knows more, the risk of accidental war decreases. Operation Ivy Bells contributed to stability, ironically by penetrating secrecy. For nearly a decade, the operation continued undetected. Think about the magnitude of that. 10 years. 10 years of access to one of the Soviet Union's most sensitive communication channels. If you've made it this far, you're seeing the true scale of what happened beneath those waters. And I promise you, the ending of this story is something you do not want to miss. Because in the end, the greatest threat to this mission did not come from Soviet sonar or patrol ships or naval commanders. It came from something far more unexpected. But before we reach that turning point, understand this. Operation Ivy Bells proved that the Cold War was not won solely through visible displays of military might. It was shaped in quiet rooms, by engineers, by divers, by sonar operators, by analysts who spent countless hours listening to recordings pulled from the ocean floor. This was a different kind of battlefield, a silent one. And for years, the United States operated there with unmatched precision. The Sea of Okhotsk remained calm on the surface. Soviet ships continued their patrols. Naval commanders issued routine orders, completely unaware that thousands of miles away, American intelligence officers were listening carefully. But no secret operation lasts forever. And in the final chapter of this story, we're going to see how Operation Ivy Bells eventually unraveled. Not because of technical failure, not because of Soviet brilliance, but because of something deeply human. Stay with me. For nearly a decade, Operation Ivy Bells functioned like a ghost in the machine of the Soviet Navy. American submarines slipped in and out of the Sea of Okhotsk. Divers replaced recording modules. Analysts in secure rooms thousands of miles away studied conversations that Soviet commanders believed were protected by geography itself. It was one of the most successful intelligence penetrations of the Cold War. And then it unraveled. Not because the Soviets detected unusual sonar signatures. Not because a patrol ship happened to look in the right place. Not because the tapping device failed. It unraveled because of betrayal. In the late 1970s, a former U.S. intelligence officer named Ronald Pelton made a decision that would change the course of the operation. Facing financial problems and personal instability, Pelton contacted the Soviet embassy and offered classified information in exchange for money. Among the secrets he revealed was Operation Ivy Bells. Think about that for a moment. Years of flawless underwater operations, thousands of hours of silent discipline, technological brilliance, strategic advantage, compromised not by superior Soviet counterintelligence, but by one individual. Once Moscow received the information, the reaction was immediate but cautious. The Soviets did not broadcast their discovery. They did not escalate publicly. Instead, they investigated quietly. Divers were dispatched to inspect undersea cables in the Sea of Okhotsk. And eventually, they found it, a foreign device, wrapped carefully around one of their most sensitive military communication lines. For Soviet officials, it was a stunning realization. The waters they considered secure had been penetrated. The communications they trusted had been monitored for years. The psychological impact inside Soviet command circles was enormous. But here is the critical point, and this is why you need to stay until the very end of this story. By the time the Soviets discovered the tap, the United States had already extracted years of strategic insight. The operation had already reshaped American understanding of Soviet naval readiness. It had already reduced uncertainty during some of the most volatile years of the Cold War. The damage, from Moscow's perspective, had already been done. If you found this story as powerful as I have, now is the moment to like the video and subscribe, because what we're about to reflect on next is the true legacy of Operation Ivy Bells, and it goes far beyond espionage. When news of the betrayal eventually surfaced inside the United States, the reaction was measured but serious. Ronald Pelton was arrested, tried, and convicted. He would spend decades in prison for espionage. But within the intelligence community, something deeper lingered. Operation Ivy Bells had proven what American engineering and discipline could achieve. It demonstrated that no assumption of security should go unchallenged. It showed that innovation could overcome geography, patrol patterns, and even strategic complacency. Yet it also revealed a hard truth. The most advanced technology in the world cannot fully protect against human weakness. And still, despite its exposure, Ivy Bells stands as one of the most audacious and effective undersea intelligence operations ever conducted. Let's step back and understand the magnitude. During the Cold War, miscalculation was the greatest threat. A misunderstanding of intentions, an incorrect assessment of readiness, or a false alarm could have triggered catastrophic escalation. Operation Ivy Bells reduced that uncertainty. By listening to real communications, American planners could differentiate between routine operations and genuine escalation. They could measure tempo. They could understand structure. They could make informed decisions rather than reactive guesses. In a nuclear standoff, that kind of clarity matters more than almost anything else. This is a part of the story that often gets overlooked. Operation Ivy Bells was not about humiliation. It was not about theatrics. It was about stability through knowledge. And that reflects something profound about American Cold War strategy. Strength was not only displayed through aircraft carriers and missile systems. It was expressed through engineering labs, through silent submarines, through divers descending into darkness, through analysts spending long nights interpreting recorded conversations. Pride does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes, pride operates quietly for 10 years beneath freezing water and changes the strategic equation without the world ever noticing. If you stayed with me all the way to this point, you now understand why this mission deserves to be remembered. And if you haven't subscribed yet, this is the perfect time to do it. Because the next story we're going to explore will reveal another hidden chapter of Cold War history that proves American innovation shaped the global balance more than most people realize. Before we close, consider one final perspective. The Sea of Okhotsk still exists. The ocean floor still holds secrets. The Cold War has ended, but strategic competition between nations has not disappeared. Operation Ivy Bells serves as a reminder that vigilance, creativity, and disciplined execution are timeless advantages. The sailors aboard the USS Halibut did not know how history would judge their mission. They operated in silence. They followed orders. They trusted their training. They trusted American engineering. And for nearly a decade, they succeeded beyond expectation. In the end, Operation Ivy Bells represents something uniquely powerful about the American approach during the Cold War. When confronted with a closed door, the response was not surrender. It was innovation. When faced with uncertainty, the answer was not panic. It was preparation. And when secrecy was required, it was maintained with professionalism that bordered on invisible. That is silent strength. That is strategic confidence. And that is a chapter of history that deserves to be remembered. If this story gave you a new perspective on how the Cold War was really fought, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications, because we're just getting started uncovering the missions that shaped the modern world. And in our next episode, we're going to explore another operation that proves something extraordinary. Sometimes the most powerful moves in history are the ones no one sees coming. Stay tuned. And remember, the deepest victories are often the quietest.